conference where graduate students present their work, but I think it's much more than that, because many of these, you all work hard on coming up with these ideas, and sometimes you have doubts: where is this leading me? Who will read this? Who will ever use this? How will I be some part of some big puzzle? But from my experience of being here for about 20 years and working with Latin American studies, I want to assure you that it does make sense. You make differences little by little, step by step, and in that sense, the title of this conference, Flowing Frontiers, the Dancing Dynamics of the Americas, is really appropriate. Also, this conference is an experiment that at this moment I would like to say worked really beautifully. It's the first time that our program decided to put the organization of the conference completely in the hands of 2 graduate students. Before, we would have a project assistant, somebody who is part of our office who was working on it. But this year, I would like to actually introduce the true protagonists and creative agents of this conference, and that's Ramona Field and Jamie Renner. Last year, they were working on helping with the organization, and it's at that moment that it occurred to us that we could actually put everything on their lap, their minds and their hands, and that's what we did. So they came up with the idea of the general topic of the conference. They came up with the name of the speaker. They provided the additional funding that was necessary. And let me assure you, this is not an easy task now when everything is being cut. We are a public university. We have a governor who is not really looking benevolently towards topics such as flowing frontiers and dancing dynamics, no matter where. And they really danced beautifully through this minefield that was ahead of them and came up with this. So I would like to actually give them the word and let them speak for themselves, because it's enough to have other people speak for you. So, and they're completely and absolutely capable of doing it. So please, I'd like you to stand up so that everybody knows who you are, because for many of the participants, you are just names on the email, and I would like them to see you embodied here. So thank you so much. And,
all right, well, thank you all for being here, and most of you are conference presenters today, so thank you as well. Yeah, the idea of dancing dynamics and flowing frontiers, as LACIS is an interdisciplinary program, we really wanted something that could reflect what LACIS really embodies. And so the crossing of borders and the musicality of study. So that's what we came up with, and we're going to start off right away with 3 people on our first panel, Ian, Jason, and Joe. And you can I'll have you just introduce yourself just a little bit if you choose to, otherwise you don't have to. And I'll give you some signals when there's 5 minutes, 2 minutes to go, so we can stay on track. And if you need anything else, either of us can get that done for you. So, all right, would you like to?
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. My name is Ian Carrillo, and I am a second-year student in the Development Studies PhD program. And this talk will be on some work I did last August in a village called Jeri in the northeast of Brazil in the state of Ceará. It's a village that's been completely transformed from a fishing subsistence economy to an entirely tourist economy within the last 30 years. So the way of life there has completely changed within one generation. And this story kind of plays out along the whole northeast, or a lot of coastline communities in the northeast of Brazil where tourism has been the sort of mode of development and mode of modernization, so to speak. So this is just one case study. Every community is different, as I'm seeing, but this is still a relatively, in terms of looking at tourism as development, there's not a whole lot, in terms of like sociology, commodity chains, I'll talk about. This is still a relatively untouched field, so I'm hoping I can move farther into the future with this. But I want to read a quote first. This is one of the drawing selling points of Jeri, where you go look at this rock called the Pedra Forada, and I think there's a similar rock in Big Sur, California. But I want to read, you'll see, this is on postcards and pictures and all these and T-shirts and things you can buy. But the president of the community council said that economic power came to Jeri because we have a product that when tourists come here, it's real. He was referring to the village's famous natural endowments, pristine beaches, giant sand dunes, picturesque rock forms that are all conducive for leisure and viewing iconic sunsets. For the past 30 years, these assets have drawn more and more tourists into the village, in the process transforming Jeri from a peasant fishing village into an economy entirely dependent on tourism. Rather than relying solely on fishing, Jeri residents now provide a variety of services related to local tourism, such as dune buggy tours, restaurants, drink vending, and retail. In short, tourism has been the engine for growth and catalyst for community change in Jeri. So some of the main points that this talk will cover will be, one, looking at tourism as part of a global commodity chain, and two, what are the community level development outcomes in these localities. And the third one I'll touch on a little bit is trying to flesh out the differences between international mass tourism and domestic mass tourism. In Brazil, the middle class has grown considerably in the last few years, and with that has the domestic tourism has also grown. And about 50% of the people that pass through Jeri are Brazilians. So the sort of idea of that this might be like a Cancun type place, this little enclave where Americans and spring breakers go, whatnot, doesn't quite play out here, as we'll see. So looking at what the traditional ideas of what a commodity chain is. This print is a little bit small, so I don't think you can read it. But the idea is that this is part of the world systems theory, in which there's the world capitalist economy has this hierarchical structure maintained through a system of commodity chains that sort of reinforce global inequalities. And so the commodity chain is a network of labor and production processes whose end result is a finished economy. So looking at the analysis of global commodity chains, we can say that it's a set of inter-firm networks which connect manufacturers, suppliers, subcontractors, and global industries to each other, and ultimately to international markets. They are principally concerned with the question of how participation in commodity chains can facilitate industrial upgrading for developing country exporters. One of the big questions is where, how, and by whom value is distributed along a commodity chain. Where is the value being extracted, and who is absorbing most of the profit? And these are the two main governance structures within global commodity chains. And we'll see that traditional analysis of global commodity chains deals with industrial goods, manufactured products, cars, apparel, shoes, toys, high-tech goods. But tourism as a service industry is a little bit overlooked, and more people now are starting to look at service a little more closely within as a global commodity chain. There are the links in the commodity chain. So service activities not only provide linkages between overlapping global commodity chains, but they also bind together the spheres of production and circulation. Services have come to play a critical role in global commodity chains because they not only provide geographical and transactional connections, but they integrate and coordinate the atomized global production process. So tourism sort of fits in with this. It's a cluster of services related to marketing, related to transport, but there's also tangible goods included in there, the airplanes, the buses, the dune buggies we'll see here. So it's a very complicated scenario. One analysis came up with this idea that people have kind of struggled to define tourism as a commodity. And right now, one of the terms I sort of like is this idea that the commodity is called the tourist experience. And this is sort of a composition of spending of the tourist experience. And as you can see, the things that are directly related to sort of leisure, I would say, are these two: nightlife, tours, and sort of just tourist attractions. And it comprises about 11% of all tourist spending. The rest are, shopping, food, lodging, local transport, and then origin, destination, or the coming and going from the tourism destination. So it's interesting in that these two leisure activities, the traditional ideas of leisure, are the trigger that initiates the rest of the other 90% of the spending. And there's probably some cases where people do travel and don't really engage in leisure, but I don't know what that would be. Some people that don't know how to travel, I guess. So Brazil nationally in the last 20 years has engaged in more coordinated efforts to promote tourism. There's been national policies, there's been state level policies. This is just a selection of a few. The print might be too small again for you to read it, but in the 60s, the two big tourism councils were founded that basically still exist today. In the state of Ceará, where I'm located, my research is located, in 1979, they established their first tourism plan for the state. And it was just kind of a way to create more hotel rooms, create some travel agencies, just sort of lay down the first infrastructure for tourism and maybe try to attract some private investment for that. In the 90s, the Brazilian government started to take this all more seriously, mostly as a way to bring in foreign exchange earnings due to the debt crisis, the balance of payments crisis. Getting some foreign money was higher on their list. So this all started to take a more, I guess, centralized approach. It was centralized, but also decentralized in that, where is it? In '93, there was a national program for the municipalization of tourism, and that was basically identifying municipalities that are relevant for tourism and sort of giving them the tools to initiate that process themselves. I don't know how much community-led development actually happened in those communities, but that was the idea. And then this program, the Produtor Northeast National Tourism Development Program, was one of the big ones that really accelerated this tourism development process in the Northeast. It was a program coordinated with the Inter-American Development Bank, the Brazilian federal government, and some state governments. And then in the 2000s, when the Lula administration came in, they started to streamline things a little bit more. They founded the Ministry of Tourism, which was previously in the Ministry of Sports and Tourism. They established a national plan for tourism, which was reestablished in 2007. And this all was kind of put in place because of the World Cup and the Olympics and trying to, push along the process of tourism. Let's see. So I want to quote something here from the National Plan for Tourism, the 2007 one, in which it explicitly stated they want to start promoting domestic tourism as a strategy. As a priority mission, the main task of the Ministry of Tourism for the next 4 years will be to strengthen the domestic market, In addition to its great economic impact, strengthening domestic tourism is a powerful tool for job and income generation, as well as for social inclusion. So anybody that's familiar with Brazil's industrial policy, the National Development Policy, the Program for Acceleration and Growth, this starts to mirror some of the same language they use that, especially the idea of social inclusion. So here we can see that a lot of the municipalities have been identified throughout the country. There's 276 touristic regions, meaning like Northwest Ceará State, Center-West Ceará State. All these things are really broken down into little regions per state, with more than 3,600 municipalities throughout the country. And the plan was relatively successful in terms of promoting tourism to bring in foreign exchange earnings. Between 1999 and 2009, the receipts for foreign tourism increased from 1.6 billion US billion to 5.3 billion. And the tourism sectors had broad rippling effects throughout the economy in terms of job growth. In spite of the fact that the tourism sector represents 2.3% of GDP, this contribution increases to 5% when one accounts for all the inputs used by the tourism complex, such as airports, ground transportation networks, and support services. Meaning that if you improve the roads for the purpose of tourism, that the roads can also support other business activities. The tourism sector accounts for 3.3% of all employment, but the tourism complex represents 6% of all employment. And for every $1 unit of additional spending on tourism, there's a 45-cent welfare gain to the Brazilian economy overall. And there's been shown that tourism can benefit the lowest income sections of the economy, as long as there's a redistributive mechanism to make sure that these benefits don't leak out to the rest of the economy, which Brazil has talked about now, done pretty well in terms of making sure that there's a formalized workforce, reducing the informal economy, and raising the minimum wage. So overall, this is domestic tourism in Brazil. How many households have a person that made a domestic trip? And overall, it has increased in every region except the Northeast and the North. So in the Center West, Southeast, and South, between 2001 and 2005, people are making more domestic trips across all income levels, except the Northeast and the North, in which it's gone down every year. It's gone down. And it's gone down in every single income level, between 1 and 4 minimum wages, 4 to 15 minimum wages, and more than 15 minimum wages. And I really don't understand. I don't have a clue why the wealthiest class are also taking less trips, or at least less domestic trips. So I don't really have a theory on that. But overall, the Northeast and the North have, or at least the Northeast, has lagged behind all of Brazil's reductions in inequality, rises in the middle class. They're just a little bit slower in pretty much all measures behind the national average. So, so looking at tourism in the Northeast, up, there's Jeri up at the top. There's been a pretty coordinated effort throughout the 80s and 90s in Ceará to promote tourism, and some of it's related to this sort of reconstructing what Ceará looks like in the Brazilian national mindset. So there's been just a rebranding of the image of Fortaleza and Ceará. It's been reflective of urban upper class tastes, removing fishermen from the coastline, basically replacing backwardness in labor with modernization and leisure. Instead of Fortaleza being seen as a hot city on the periphery of a desert, it's now seen as it's called the City of the Sun, and it's got beaches. There's even a soap opera in the mid-90s that sort of helped enhance the city's image on a national scale. So looking, I don't have much time, I have to go through this pretty quick. Looking at what's going on in Jeri, there's major changes in employment and wages. In the past, as an interviewee told me, women just made fish nets and men just fished. Now there's diversification of knowledge and whatnot. There is improved infrastructure. And there's been one of the most markedly negative things that I saw was the increased segmentation of land markets. That I'll explain here in a second, briskly. So these are some of the, just a visual of some of the jobs that go on. Most of the work in Jeri is in lodging and restaurants. That comprises about 75%, 80% of, and the rest are supportive services like maybe dune buggy tours or travel agencies, some retail. These are all the drink vendors, called the hakas. The infrastructure improvement. This is a picture of, on the top is one of the new primary schools. Here there's now that they have power, they got power about in 1998. They have refrigerators now, which has led to diversification in diet, an easier way to feed families. Somebody told me, somebody that had grown up, in the 70s and 80s, there was like, yeah, now we can feed our family for a month without really having a lot of anxiety. So this is great. And of course, everybody wants all the modern conveniences on credit. So there's stoves and microwaves and laptops and motorcycles and whatnot. But one of the most pronounced things is the segmentation of land markets. So this is basically the main touristic area. The yellow lines are lined with some restaurants, hotels, and whatnot. And as Jeri residents, as more tourists started coming to Jeri in the 80s and 90s, Jeri residents started to they realized they could make a lot of money just selling their land to tourists coming in that wanted to invest, mostly Brazilians at one point. And they reached a point where the local residents couldn't afford rental properties because the same rental properties were competing with tourists who wanted to rent there also. So the price very quickly outpaced local wages. And about 10 years ago, there was a housing crisis where a lot of local residents just didn't really have any place to live. So there was a lot of back and forth arguing between them and the municipal government. And they reached a deal where the government donated land and houses in this area of the town. So people there pay income-adjusted rent. They can't sell the houses or the property. So it sort of solved this crisis, but it also reinforced what I think is the segregation of the town. This is where the natives live, and this is where the tourists live. So it's sort of a temporary solution, as far as I can see. And now, to buy a house there costs about 190,000 reais, 80-some thousand US dollars. The minimum wage there is 600 reais, so nobody can really afford to even buy a house there if you make the local wages. But this is a picture of one of the little houses that's being built. So they're pretty humble. Some are bigger than others. It really depends on the size of the family, what you get. I've been inside a couple of them, and they're actually pretty nice. But this is one of the most simple ones that I saw. So just to re-summarize what's going on, I didn't get a chance to cover this too much because I mismanaged my time, but there's a diversification of employment and increases in wage. There's improvements in health and education, but they still lack. People there still complain about how they don't have access to specialized health services. They have to travel maybe an hour away, maybe 4 hours away to do something more specialized. In education, there's not a whole lot of access to higher level education. You still have to go 2-3 hours away, and most local families can't afford that cost. And a lot of people in town don't like the local doctor. They don't think he's good. So that's something a lot of people complained about. The increased consumption levels, I think there's a threshold there, but one person said to me, yeah, we make money and buy more things, but why? I mean, we can feed ourselves, but now everybody wants to make more so they can buy more, so they charge more. And in the past, you know, money just didn't matter as much. So there's a little bit of romanticizing of the past. But yeah, this kind of gets into sort of the moral idea of what development means. Is it just to have happiness, or is it to always be able to consume the newest technology or whatnot? And then, of course, land market segmentation is a big thing. As the population grows, the borders are fixed because Jeri is in a national park. It's an environmentally protected area. So you can't just grow the borders to satisfy the increases in population. So that's something that will have to be resolved in the next few years. And that's it. Thank you.
Hello everyone, thanks for being here. I'm Jason New. I'm a third year PhD student here in the geography department right across the street in Science Hall. So today I'm going to be talking about the preliminary pre-dissertation fieldwork I did in Rio de Janeiro last summer. I'm currently working on developing a dissertation proposal based off of this material. So I'd welcome any suggestions at the end about where you feel this work has potential, where it's most interesting, what directions I might want to take it. So I looked at redevelopment projects in Rio in the context of its preparations to host a series of mega events, including the Olympic Games in 2016. I'm interested in the transnational dimensions of urban management associated with these events. Planners in Rio are looking outwards to cities around the world for examples of best practices